So here are 10 tips and tricks to spice up your junior high school students' English speech. In a previous video, we already covered the overarching structure of the speech and the tone and the feeling you want to aim for in a winning speech. This video is more on 10 concrete, small things you can do, tips and tweaks and optimizations you can make to the speech to turn kind of a boring, kind of a run-of-the-mill speech into something really special. So let's get into it. The first tip, tip one, has to do with the title. Now, the title, of course, is the listener's first exposure to the speech, so obviously it's very important. You want something short, 1, 2, maybe 3 words, funny, pithy, kind of a play on words, and above all, you want it to be non-obvious. The title's job is to stimulate interest in the speech, to make the listener think, gee, I wonder what this speech is about. So, for example, if the student is writing about their grandfather who had a great impact on their life, you don't want to title it My Grandfather. And if they're talking about saving the earth and saving the trees and like that, you're not going to win the speech contest. But anyway, if you can't stop yourself, you don't want to title a speech like that, Let's Save the Earth. It's too obvious, too on the nose. So a short, intriguing, titillating, non-obvious title. Tip number 2 is to include other characters in the story of the speech. Now, left to their own devices, students will not want to do this. They'll write about themselves and their own thoughts exclusively. Or if they do include other characters in the speech, they'll make them very anodyne, vanilla characters, right? So they might say something like, my mother encouraged me. Well, yeah, but what exactly did she say to encourage you? And using dialogue, that is to say direct quotations in the speech, is critical too. So if the student is saying something like, well, my friend teased me, that's boring, that has no impact. Say something like, my friend said, hey, Satoshi, what are you doing? You suck, or something like that. Pro tip, don't use the word suck in your speech. But you want some of this direct quotation. Now, admittedly, this requires your student to sort of reinvent or recreate the dialogue, some dialogue that may not have actually happened in real life. But as I talked about in that other video, there is some editorial license that you and the student have in creating the speech. And yeah, you can include some direct dialogue, even if it's not 100% verbatim what was actually said. But to repeat, students tend not to want to include other characters in their speech, and they certainly don't want to make them interesting. Parents, teachers, classmates, they just come off as really boring. So let's spice that stuff up. Tip number 3 is to include polished gestures. Now, I say polished because, let's face it, gestures can be fraught. You need to avoid the tendency to use too many gestures. Some students and teachers seem to think that when it comes to gestures, the more the better, but that's not the case. Students end up, standing behind that podium, writhing around and dancing and throwing their arms around. Gestures need to be planned and rehearsed, and not, importantly, what occurs to the student in the moment up on that podium. They're too nervous. Nervous students cannot make natural gestures. A couple of years ago, I was at a high school speech contest, and my student did not win, and I had an opportunity to speak with one of the judges after the speech. And he said something, and while he doesn't speak for all of the English speech contest judges across Japan, he said something that stuck with me. He said, too many or inappropriate gestures can sink an otherwise worthy speech, while a winning speech may have no gestures at all. Gestures can actually do a lot more harm than good if you're not careful. So my advice is be conservative with the gestures. A few, 3, 4, 5, well-planned, well-thought-out, well-rehearsed gestures is fine. Final thought, the best gestures are done not with the hands or the arms, but with the whole body. Maybe the student can lean forward to make a point or kind of puff out their chest to seem a little haughty or proud or something. And of course, the face to show joy or embarrassment with your expression. These are the gestures that really have some impact. Tip number 4 is find a reason in your speech somewhere to honor Japanese society in some way. Some Japanese custom, some holiday, some sport, some Japanese game like shogi, even if just tangentially. You don't have to center your whole speech around this stuff, but think about the textbooks and their kind of pro-Japan slant. You want to include just a touch of that because you don't want to come off, making this English speech that the student just hates their mother country of Japan and like this. So throw in something about, Japan's a great country too. Tip number 5 is to work your student's name into the speech. Now, of course, every student's name is up there at the top of the speech, but you need to find a reason for the student to say their own name in the course of the speech. Have your student introduce him or herself at the beginning. Hi, I'm Aika, and I'm going to talk to you about this, or hi, I'm Satoshi, or whatever. Have other characters in the speech call your student by name. Remember, we're including other characters in the speech, if you'll recall tip number 2. Maybe argue or fight with them or encourage them using their name. By the end of the speech, everyone will have heard your student's name several times and they know this student. And knowing someone's name makes you feel closer to them. So by the end, the audience, and importantly, the judges, will remember the speech not just as number 16 or that one about saving the environment, but no, that's Aika's speech, that's Satoshi's speech or whoever. And they will not remember other speeches, other student speeches in the same way or with the same affection. Tip number 6 is going to sound sexist, but I'm going to say it anyway. Where possible, choose a boy. Here's the reality. The statistical reality is that boys tend to win over girls. At the local contest, it's 80 to 90% boys. So that means if you have 30 students in the contest, there may be 3, 4, 5, maybe as many as 6 boys. When you move up to the prefectural contest, it's now about 2 to 1 girls to boys. So the boys are up to about 33%. And go to the national contest, and it's about 50-50 boys to girls. So while there are still a lot of girls at the national contest, at the finals, it's apparent that boys have a wind at their backs where girls are facing something of a headwind. Now, why is this? Some possible reasons may be sexist reasons. Do judges hear, let's say, equivalent speeches by boys and girls and just assign more gravitas to the speeches by the boys? Possibly. Is it that boys are more self-selecting when they volunteer to take part in the contest? That only the top tier boys actually have the courage to raise their hand, where girls are a little quicker to raise their hand, regardless of their own actual ability? I don't know. Or is there a tendency of judges to represent both genders in when choosing the winners? Maybe according to score totals, the 3 winners should be all girls, but there's a tendency to take the number 3 girl and say, you know what? That boy, actually, the score may not quite reflect it, but he was pretty good. Let's swap out the boy, or a boy, the top boy, for that bottom girl. I don't know. I don't know. And maybe it's a fool's errand to even think about this, but I've been to the national contest 6 times, and 5 times were with boys. Now, the second to last time I went, I took a girl, and she was fantastic, and I would take her again. I'm glad I chose her, but yeah, boys just tend to win over girls. That's the reality. Tip number 7 is similar to tip number 6. Where possible, go with a younger student. Judges seem charmed by the younger students. I've had students chosen who were not honestly the best, I thought, in the contest, but they got bonus points because they were younger. So if you have a first or even a second or even a first grader who's just outstanding at English, take a chance on them. Tip number 8, I will agree, might be a little bit edgy, but it's the following. Include one sentence beyond what on paper is the end of the speech. So this is a bit edgy, as I say. I can imagine some judges not warming to this, but in my experience, it seems to work. I'll tell you a quick story here, because let's bring it back to me. I had a student some years ago who was making a speech on Jodo. Jodo is written cane and way, so it's way of the cane. It's a niche Japanese martial art, sort of a cousin to kendo. In any case, he comes to the end of the speech and he says on paper, the final 2 lines of his speech are, "And that's why I'm here today. I want to invite you, all of you, to come and experience Jodo, the way of the cane." And on paper, his speech ends there. But then he went one sentence further and he said, "Practices from 7:30 to 9 o'clock at the Hanashima Kominkan in beautiful Kiyotake town." None of that was true, of course. It was all fiction. The judge's reaction was positive. I was sitting directly behind one of the judges. My memory was the judge on the right. And I was watching him during the speech. I wasn't even watching my student. I was filming my student. I'd watch him later. I was watching the judge's reaction. And when my student said this extra line after the end of his speech, I saw the judge's shoulders go kind of like this. He giggled. And in that moment, I knew this student was going to be among the winners and go on to the national finals. And he did. Tip number 9 is the following. Spice up the final "thank you for listening." Now, almost all students end their speeches by saying "thank you for listening." Everybody says it at the end of their speech, but it comes off as limp and uninspired. It can almost sound apologetic. I would suggest you say something at a minimum like, "Thank you very much for listening," or even, "Thanks a lot, you guys have been a great audience," or something like that. Or, if you can, tailor the thank you to the content of the speech itself. So, to bring it back to me again, about 10 years ago, I guess, I was helping a student with a speech. And he was a first grade junior high school boy, and he hadn't had anything approaching a growth spurt yet. He was a tiny kid. He wasn't a little person like that. No, he looked like a kindergartner, if I'm being honest. He was really tiny. And he began his speech by saying, "My name is Kodai, and I am a tiny boy. Let me tell you my story." And he finished the speech by saying, "Thank you for listening to my tiny speech." So it's references like that that can be a callback to something the student said earlier in the speech. Good idea. So in any case, yeah, spice up that final thank you for listening. And the final tip on this list, tip number 10, is to preserve the smell of the junior high school English speech. If you've been a teacher for any length of time, you'll know that when students write any composition, there's a pattern to it. There are turns of phrase that junior high school students tend to use, they're prone to use. They may make slight, syntax mistakes, usage mistakes, perhaps not outright grammar mistakes. I wouldn't advocate leaving those in, but they'll speak in a way which native speakers might not speak. You should leave those in, even if you're helping the student with the speech and it might be your tendency to write something that a native speaker would write. It comes off as authentic if the English is just a little bit off in the way junior high school students will tend to write it. You don't want people to listen to the speech and think, "Oh, the ALT just wrote that for them." So, to sum up, short, pithy, non-obvious title that titillates interest in the speech, including other characters with actual quoted dialogue, polished, refined, rehearsed gestures that are sparse, a respect for Japanese society and culture, working the student's name into the speech, choosing a boy where possible, where practical, choosing a younger student, again, where possible, tagging one sentence after the end of what on paper is the end of the speech, spicing up that final "thank you for listening," and finally, preserving the smell, if you will, of the junior high school English speech. These are things that can really spice up even a middling kind of run-of-the-mill speech. And I recommend that you do these 10. Thank you very much for listening. I wish you the best of luck in your speech, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next video. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.